Good evening, everyone, and welcome to day number 3 of a riveting evening here on October 10th, 2024. Can I have everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation,
under God,
indivisible,
with liberty.
justice for all. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Gilliam,
Present.
Councilmember Whitting,
Present.
Councilmember Dorr, Councilmember Adler, Councilmember Johnson,
Present.
Deputy Mayor King,
Present.
Mayor Castema.
Present.
All right, moving on to the approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
I make a motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carries on. Moving on to the agenda items. 1A, topics not completed from Wednesday. It looks like we completed everything. So we will move on to agenda item 1B, LTAC. Steve?
Sure. So I'll turn it over to Mayor Castema here in just a moment. Going to lead the discussion, but obviously you've already had one discussion on this, and council gave some general direction on a reallocation. And so my understanding is Mayor Castema met with the LTAC committee, and there's been a reallocation, and that is before you this evening. And then I'll turn it over to Mayor Castema.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Deputy Mayor, for being in my stead this evening. The LTAC committee met again, and I took back the concerns of the council, and I believe we arrived at somewhat of a compromise, and hopefully the council will find it acceptable. But what we did is we took everyone's award back to what they were awarded last year, or their desired amount for this year if it was less. And in the case of the Fred Oldfield Museum, it was actually less. So that freed up approximately $34,000. And we have this new applicant that many of you were very concerned that they did not receive any funds. They spoke at the LTAC meeting, and they conveyed what they would be using the money for. And the LTAC committee went ahead and voted in favor of allocating them those funds. And again, everyone, in fact, taking somewhat of a haircut back to the allocation last year. There was concern, and I did convey that to the LTAC committee, that there were people who were looking at the Chamber of Commerce allocation for their visitor center, and they wanted the money taken directly from them. But I think the feeling was from the members of the LTAC committee was that that still played a very important role. For example, the products that have come out of there have been internet related, Also, we were able to get a magazine to go ahead and identify Puyallup as one of the more desirable places to reside. And all of those cumulative efforts, they felt should at least maintain where they were last year. Again, I know this is not representative of at least two members' wishes, but I think that it was a good compromise, and I hope that the council would agree.
Are there any council members that would like to discuss this? Councilmember Adler.
I just have a question related to the projects that were discussed yesterday. And so at whatever time those projects are decided upon, will there be another updated round of numbers?
Mayor Castema.
Yeah, good question. The LTAC committee just looks at the amounts that the council allots, and they really review that for any comments, but they do not modify that or suggest modifications. They just review those over. I guess if they wanted to, they could suggest modifications, but they really have no say over that. And Barbara, correct me if I don't have the exact amount in front of me, but we have over $1 million, I believe, left in LTAC. Is that the amount?
It's actually closer to 1.5
Okay.
left over.
So as I understand it, Barbara, you may still want to stay there, is that the council can make allocations from that without having to go back to the LTAC committee. Am I correct?
Actually, we would need to send it back to them at some point for them to kind of give their blessing, but I have seen that been done after the fact.
Okay. So Councilmember Adler, if we decide to use LTAC funds and it does have to go back, it would be another advisory, session where they would view it, give us their opinion, and come back. But we can make those decisions at a future point. Barbara, please correct me if I'm wrong at any point.
I believe that that's correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other council members? Councilmember Whitting.
I move we approve the proposal advanced.
We're not voting on it tonight.
True enough. Thank you.
Anything else?
I like it.
Councilmember Whitting likes it. Okay. Anyone else? All right. Can we move on to 1C? All right. Community grants. Who would like to discuss community grants? Ned, community grants.
Oh.
Councilmember Whitting, excuse me.
We made a great proposal for your acceptance. I'm not prepared tonight to talk about this. I've had a busy couple of days and if can we bring up the slide and I can walk through it? Do we have a slide on this?
Page 31 of your budget.
Okay, so I can almost read that. So basically, we tried to keep on a steady course with what we'd done in the past. But we did have a number of larger requests, new requests this year. So there was in the last year or two, with all the ARPA spending, people didn't really bother applying for the community grants very much. So it was a pretty easy process. This year it was a little more challenging. All Saints Community Service, we've been funding at $4,500 a year for some time and propose to keep that. Communities and Schools made a request for $30,000. We are recommending 10. community health care services, that they actually had two requests, one for 6,000 and one for 10,000. And we had looked at doing the smaller of the two. The Helping Hand House, they, this is kind of an interesting one. There's been some changes at Helping Hand House, and really didn't get much information about that. Change in executive director, we were a little concerned about the stability there, the contributions being made by the board members had dropped significantly from past years. So if their board isn't supporting themselves, then we didn't feel like we wanted to contribute quite as much. So we pulled back from Helping Hand House this year. Went from 90, their request was for 95. We had funded 95 last year. We cut that in half. Mikasa, we've been funding at 25,000. We continued that. We had requests from the Pierce College Foundation and Puyallup Communities and Schools that we didn't. Actually, that was the 2022 award. They didn't make a request this year. Puyallup Food Bank requested 100,000. They're a good, seemed like a good organization. They go well beyond the services of just the food bank. They have caseworkers and so forth, and seem to be doing some pretty good work here in town. So we thought it was appropriate to fund them. But again, we had a lot of requests. So we this was our first time we'd funded them in a while. So we suggested 20,000. St. Francis House, great organization. They've got Sister Pat retired. I guess it's been a little more than a year now. And they've been a good organization, do good work in our community. We wanted to show our support to them through the transition period. Tacoma Rescue Mission really doesn't service Puyallup, so we try to direct our contributions to agencies that focus primarily on Puyallup. Vallejo Vocation is, I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with them, but they're kind of an employment service for unemployed people, and that seems like a worthwhile goal. If we get people jobs, then they're not they're able to afford housing and don't end up homeless. So we thought that was a worthy thing. So we supported that. So we did 144,000 in community grants last year. Our requests were at 350,000 this year. So we came in at just about half of the requested amount at 168,000. So any questions? It's a little more challenging this year than it has been in the past.
Councilmember Dorr.
So I'm revealing quickly the food bank's application, but the funding was taken back from the food bank previously due to some language in their application. And I'm trying to see, did you revisit that, and has that issue been addressed?
I wasn't aware of that issue.
So that the issue was at the time that they were seeking grants to purchase the buildings along Stewart, and that it was for homeless services, which that area is not zoned for. And so there was, Steve, do you want to elaborate more eloquently on the issue?
Sure. Yeah. So this was a couple years ago, they were looking to do basically a kind of drop-in type of center where they would be a drop-in location for a homeless services. And we have a code provision in our municipal code that has to be regulated, and they did not go through the application process for that. And so there was some funding at that point where council did not feel comfortable providing funding to the food bank based on that.
Am I hearing a concern about that? I haven't observed any drop-ins sort of thing going on there.
So the issue was that the food bank was representing that the city had supported this and that they had approval. What they were representing that on their applications, and it came to a point where we were being asked, did we in fact do this? Did we support this? Did we, but the applications for their grants, they misrepresented the city's position. Steve had gone down there and handed them the city code, tried to work with them. And the language in their application, at the time, and I'm sorry, I just can't read this all at one time. The language in their application said that they were going to use it for that purpose. So therefore, if we awarded the funds, does that equate to the city agreeing and supporting their position on that? So that is why council stopped funding them. I just can't tell quickly enough. And Mayor Castema, I think you recall that issue as well. You were here. Well, I'm not calling out. You three of you have an excuse. The rest of you don't.
Well,
but I'm curious as if it's been resolved.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, so that would be my only concern is, that we look into that and see, because, for future efforts, I want to make sure that we know what's happening there. Steve?
And what we could do, excuse me, is in the grant acceptance, because just for those, just as a refresher, when we distribute these funds, the organizations have to sign a contract. So it's not, the city doesn't just turn over the funds to the organization, because in essence, what the community grants are is they're doing a service for the community instead of us, the city, doing it. And so there is a contract that city clerks and city attorney administer and they sign. So I think what we would do with this one is ensure that that contract has language such that the funding cannot be used in contravention of city municipal codes, and include that language in there. And that might already be in there. I don't know, but I can consult the city attorney and we can make sure it is.
So I'm not saying no to this, but I think before we pass it, we should find out, what if they are, and maybe their plans have changed. I don't know. But that was a concern of the council. That's why the funding was not, why it stopped being awarded. And it was lots of efforts on the city staff to resolve the matter, and we're unsuccessful. And then on Helping Hand House, I'm not entirely sure I understand the revenue, if they're not investing in themselves, but I don't know that that's necessarily a requirement. And people can serve without having, maybe that's their option. It is entirely possible that somebody wants to serve, but not financially able to contribute. So I don't know that saying that they're not contributing themselves is necessarily a disqualification. And I don't know, as far as the change in leadership, those things happen. So I'm not sure that, us not knowing about it doesn't seem like it's their responsibility to notify us of that. So those are just my comments on it. Doesn't indicate or take away whether I support it or not.
Any other conversation? Councilmember Adler?
Thank you. I have a question for the city manager. When these applications come in, are they reviewed by staff prior to being put before the committee, of which I am a member of? Just to clarify.
I believe they go to the city clerk, who then distributes them out to the committee in terms of reviewing them. I don't know to what extent that review is.
I asked the question because, you know, obviously I was not here last round and am not privy to all of the details that are related to what happened the last go around. But thinking back to what the mayor had shared when the LTAC recommendations were first introduced a few weeks ago, and mentioned a review of the application process and what the application is and the information that is required. At which time I also said that I think that the community grant funding applications also need to be reviewed and updated. You know, I think so we don't end up in a similar situation moving forward. It would be, you know, my desire that staff review the applications more closely to see if there is a conflict of sorts related to what Councilmember Dorr was saying about what has happened in the past. Because that's what it sounds like. There was a conflict, perhaps, or potentially rather. And so for me, as someone who serves on the committee, I would just like to know that once we're starting to review applications, there is no future conflict.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I do know that legal certainly reviews them for legality reasons, because we have had that issue in the past where there was a question of whether or not the funds were being used. And this is also for LTAC too, where there were some concerns about funds being used for political purposes and funds being used for religious purposes. And so I know that there is that basic level review, but in terms of reviewing, like in this case for the food bank, and that's why I was saying at the end of if council approves this, then the legal would have provisions in there to say, and it might already be in there, I just don't have it in front of me, to say you can't use the funds in contravention of city code. It's to a certain extent, it should be obvious, but let's make sure it's in there just to make sure.
May I comment too? Council member, Deputy Mayor, is it okay if I speak?
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Adler, I take to heart your comment about a standardization of the process that we go through on both of these committees. I think requires a lot of work in the interim. And it's important that we get feedback from yourself, other members, and put in place a system that's predictable and more measurable. And more, I would dare say, maybe a little bit more with the criteria, trying to get as close to an objective process as possible. All of which I think has to be examined in the interim. And so I take to heart what you said.
Thank you. If I may just finish.
Yeah.
I only share that request because as someone who is new and not privy to what happened prior, it makes me very uncomfortable to sit here and basically say, well, are they going to use the money that they say that they're going to, or that they're requesting it for? And I think, you know, Joe, you can stop me, but you know, that's a place where frankly, I don't want to go. So, and for the record, I'll just say that what the food bank has written in their application is that, you know, they would like investment in the Puyallup Food Bank solar project. You know, if folks want access to see the applications and whatever, those are public documents. But again, it's a gray area, slippery slope there that I would strongly recommend my colleagues be very conscious of. Thank you.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd be interested in maybe having staff look over that application to make sure that the allotment that the committee has granted of 20,000 is still appropriate and adequate. I do want to remind council that although Councilmember Whitting mentioned that the requests for 2025 were 350 and we basically offered roughly half, sounds worse than it really is because it was, $23,000 more than last year, what we gave. Just the requests were exorbitantly higher this year, so it made it sound like we held back. But when you look at the prior year, we gave $23,500 more than we did last year. So we haven't cut back on giving. It's just that some folks had asked a considerable amount more when it was zero for the last 3 years. So just a reminder of that. But I'm satisfied with where we landed on this. Although I'm since we're not going to be passing this tonight anyway, I certainly would entertain the concerns that were mentioned for the 20,000 in the food bank if there needs to be, some kind of qualifying factors to revisit or move it through. Thank you.
Councilmember Dorr.
Thank you. So I'm not again, I understand what Councilmember Adler is saying. And I don't know, Steve, is your language going to address the issue, which was they were using the last application that we had from them indicated that they were going to do these services. And by signing the contract, we were saying that they could, it was in conflict. Yeah. So they were, I understand that, but they were seeking county funds. They were seeking a grant from the county. However, then we had this issue with them misrepresenting where the city's position was that they could in fact buy these buildings on that block, use them for homeless services. And that area, it's not consistent with the zoning for the area. And so there was some back and forth and some clarification from city manager's office that this couldn't be done. So the question that arose was, it was in their mission statement that they were going to do this. We were awarding funds, but yet we said we don't support. And so there was a conflict there. So what I'm asking is that issue resolved? That it no longer exists? And with the language that Steve is talking about, so can you remind me what the language you were just?
So I think your concern, and completely understand it, is you would not support funds being used for something that is in contravention of our municipal code and using the funds towards a development project. They're purchasing a property that when they don't follow our code. And I think that absolutely can be something, if it's not already within the contract, to say that they have to follow city law. I think it's probably already in there. I just don't have it in front of me.
But the question is, because they were using our funds for a grant that was against our code. So how does your language address that issue? How do you say you can't go out and say, okay, the city of Puyallup gave us this money, we're seeking this grant to do this thing that they don't allow us to do? So how do that was what the problem was. They were using it as for a grant issue. I guess that's my question, is the language that you're talking about, does that solve that problem?
I think it will, but why don't we work with the city attorney just to make sure that is
Okay.
before it comes.
So that's my only concern, is that it's, that is no longer a thing.
Councilmember Gilliam.
Oh, sorry. Apparently there's a long line of us. I think Ned's after me, so sorry, Lauren. So I think what I think I'm hearing, because I am in agreement with Councilmember Dorr on, are we supporting community, when we're giving community grants, it's going towards something that definitely aligns with our codes. However, when I was reviewing the food bank application, it didn't say anything about building anything or purchasing a building of any kind. But what I am curious about is if that's something that they would have to go through us to try to rezone an area, but they're probably allowed to buy a building, right? So if they're going to do something out of that building that doesn't meet our codes, we can say, no, you can't do that, but they can still buy a building. So if we give them a community grant that meets a need and lifts the burden of their capital projects, and they put the money towards the things they need, kind of like we do with our budget, right? Hey, we now have money for our streets. So now that frees up our city budget to do what we need to do for our city budget. They get a grant that frees up that they can help do this thing, but it's also in their heart to buy a building. We can't hold back funds for that, right? Now, what they use the building for, if it goes against our code, we can say you can't do that activity, but you can have a building. I just want to make sure I'm following what we're doing. We can't tell them, no, you can't have a building. You can't buy a building, but we can say you can't do these activities because that's the outside of our code. Is that kind of what we're doing
So
here?
the community grant funds are for them to do a service that they have provided in the application. So that's what they indicate that they will do with those funds. By contract, they have to do, and they sign a contract with us because we can't just donate funds as public funds. And so they are obligated to follow the contract use of those funds.
But we're not saying you're not allowed to buy a building.
But, well, so going back, they were, and this was a few years back, they were applying for a county grant to use funds to purchase a building that would have been used in a way that was counter to and against our own code.
Okay.
So that's where this all started.
Okay. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to clarify. Thank you.
Councilmember Whitting.
Obviously, there's some issues here that we don't probably have enough information to really weigh in on this, where there's a lot of suppositions going on. I'm going to suggest that we refer this back to staff and have them come back and give us a comprehensive report on this particular one before we do final approval of the budget. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Councilmember Dorr and then I'll come over to Adler.
So the reason I raised this is when Councilmember Whitting said we haven't funded them for a while. And so and we do have new council members, and I'm trying to inform why we didn't, what happened here and why they were no longer funded. And then not on that committee, I was looking to see if we've resolved the possibility of that happening again. There was concern from the neighbors because there's houses behind there. They weren't being notified of any of these plans for homeless drop-in services and things like that. So it was a bigger issue. It could be totally moot by this point. I just don't know. That's the other part of why I was asking.
Councilmember Adler.
Thank you. So I'm going to end where I started my comments, which is I agree with Councilmember Whitting that this needs to go back and then come back for us to review. And to the beginning of my comments, which is, I am a new member of this body. It's my first participation in the Community Grants Committee. I had no prior information related to the applicants, any of the applicants, and perhaps what challenges they have faced in the past and or why different applicants were funded at different levels, et cetera. And frankly, that's because I trust the good staff to continue doing their very good work. But clearly there was a breakdown in the process, or the review process needs to be strengthened before it comes before the committee. And so, for me, especially as a new person, I'm going to really depend on that staff work and to make sure that everything is consistent and is within, the requests are within our code, and our appropriate use of funds, et cetera. Because again, I would very much not like to end up in this space again where we are questioning if what people are writing are actually what they're going to be doing. It's just a very slippery slope that makes me very uncomfortable. Thank you very much.
Any further discussion regarding community grants? All right, moving on to agenda item 1D for council direction. City Manager Kirkley.
So thank you. I put before you budget timeline of the next steps. So that's before you. As I said on day one, these are not votes. You're not taking votes on this. This is just time to study. If you have any questions, want further information before this actually comes back to you for deliberation and voting. And so what the plan would be going forward and what you have before you is on October 29th, you would have a public hearing. So you have to have a public hearing on a few things. One, you have to have it on the budget itself, the biennial budget. You have to have a public hearing on the property tax levy, and then you have to have a public hearing on the formation of the transportation benefit district. And so we would bring all of those for you on October 29th. And then there would be the first reading of the ordinance establishing the transportation benefit district. If that is approved, first reading, then on November 12th would be the second reading of an ordinance establishing the transportation benefit district. And then on November 19th would be the first readings of the budget, the transportation benefit district. If it is approved, then at that first reading of the ordinance would be on the existing preliminary budget that's before you. Also, we would be including the council initiated items because there were a few items last night that you all approved. And so those items that are actually, we would attach dollar amounts to those and they would be a part of that budget for your approval. And so you do your first readings of the budgets on the 19th and a couple of resolutions there. The resolution setting the property tax revenue amounts and percentages, that's required by the county assessor. So that just simply says the actual dollar amount of revenues that have to be brought in and then the percentage of that. And then there would be a resolution funding the TPD. And so that would be the resolution setting the 1/10 of 1% sales tax. Then on November 26th, all of that, or the budget and the property tax levy would come back for second reading. That still leaves you December 10th in case this timeline doesn't work. Obviously, this assumes first and second readings, but there could be times where council may not make a decision on a particular night. So we always like to leave that extra meeting there in case you need it. And as some cities do, they even set special meetings. The budget just has to be adopted by the end of December. So at this point, what we would be bringing back at first reading are the preliminary budget as it's presented. And then we'll do a little bit of follow-up work on the council initiatives and get some final numbers on those before it comes back to you for first reading. So we should have all of that by the October 29th hearing. So that is, so if there's any particular questions or any further direction that you want to provide, that's great. If not, what I just laid out would be the next steps.
Thank you, City Manager Kirkley. Do any council members have anything to speak on regarding that? No? Okay. Agenda item 1E says wrap it up. So any last words for the good of the order?
Deputy Mayor King, I apologize for not being there this evening. It was on the advice of my doctor that I not show up. I apologize. I'd like to see all of you, but I'll be back in form next week.
Thank you, Mayor Castema. Hope you heal up quickly, and we look forward to your return. Council Member Gilliam.
I just wanted to say, I hope you recover quickly, Mayor Castema. Thank you, city staff, for all your intensive work and thorough work for us. Really appreciate you. And thank you, Deputy Mayor, for leading the last 2 nights. Well done, sir.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, I too would like to say, I think it was a very productive study session by council in terms of dialoguing and asking some good questions, all done very civil, in a very civic manner, but also very pointed manner. Again, I think very efficient. I also want to thank staff. I think, we had to listen for a few hours, but I can only imagine the hours it took for you to prepare your presentations is labor intensive. So thank you for your efforts to put those things together and bring it to us in such an articulate way that is somewhat able to digest in your language and in your words. So very well done. And thank you also for allowing us to, at times, press the buttons and test. And I know that you senior staff members understand it, but I also want to articulate sometimes when we're pressing, we know that we're able to separate professionalism from policy, and certainly not meant to be intentional. And so again, thanks staff for being very professional and really allowing us to kind of ask questions and sometimes challenge and tough questions. You are remarkable under pressure. And then again, thanks to our key leader of the staff, our Steve Kirkley. Well done putting another study session together for us. And I just want to make a kind of a personal comment. I know Steve probably wouldn't appreciate this. It's not his style. But, I've been watching Steve and his city manager. How many years has it been now? 5 years. It's interesting. And I don't know about others have noticed it, but I've noticed in the last probably 1 or 2 years, he's really come into a rhythm. That learning curve, the first few years, you were very competent, doing a great job, but you can just really tell you're in a rhythm. And it's really great to see leadership that's found their rhythm and they're just on pace, and it's only going to get better. And so our city is going to benefit from that, and staff will benefit from it. And so does council. So anyway, there's my comments on the study session. I would say well done.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. Moving on to citizens' comments. There are no citizens in the gallery today, so we will be skipping through that. Unless Chief Engel wants to just talk about something. No, I'm kidding. Okay, perfect. No, very productive budget session this year. It's kind of like building a rocket ship, getting everything built and ready to go, and takes all this time and energy to get that rocket ship ready to go. And then everybody came up and stated their case, and now we're ready to blast off into 2025. So thank you all. Thank you, staff. Thank you, City Manager Herkley. And thank you, Mayor Castema. And this concludes our budget study session for this week, Thursday, October 10th. Meeting is adjourned.